Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I see some friends in the audience that I know, so that's always nice. I'm going to talk about native plants for pollinators. It's a very popular topic right now. People are concerned about pollinators and want to make sure that we have enough pollinators. And you've heard about the decrease in all insects. So hopefully this will be helpful for you guys. Let's see, I just pushed this button.
And let's see if it's not working.
Oh, there we go. Something worked. Wait, go back.
Okay. Do it again. See if it works.
Yeah, it works.
Okay.
So here's basically what we're going to talk about is why we need them, who they are, what do they need? So how can we get them to come to our garden? And we'll talk about native plants and then a little bit about choosing them and caring for them. And Cindy, who lives locally, is going to also talk about some plants that are in her garden too that really help the pollinators. I live in Arroyo Grande. It's not that far away, but we have a different climate, definitely. But we do talk to groups for all different areas of the county. So why do we need pollinators? Anyone want to help me out? Why do we need pollinators? Fruit. You want fruit? That's a good idea. Honey. We can get honey from pollinators. I heard someone say something. Seeds, right, good. So if we want the plants to reproduce and we want to eat them, we're going to need pollinators. 85% of flowering plants need a pollinator to help pollinate them. So, some plants can be self-pollinated, some are wind-pollinated, but the majority of flowering plants are going to need a pollinator. And they say that 1/3 of every mouthful of food and drink that we take in was affected by a pollinator. We needed a pollinator to provide that. And it's not just about our food, right? There's a lot of other animals that need food that are provided by pollinators, all the way from baby birds to grizzly bears. So birds, land birds, 96% of land birds feed insects to their young. And 50% of those insects are caterpillars. I'm going to mention caterpillars a lot today because caterpillars are really driving our biodiversity, right? Everybody wants to eat a caterpillar, right? Nice big fat caterpillar. So definitely the birds are looking for those. And grizzly bears eat moths. Who knew? They turn over rocks and find these miller moths, and they can eat 40,000 a day. So they're, and you would think like that big bear, eating those little teeny moths. So insects and pollinators are really important to a lot of animals, not just us. But I kind of think of pollinators as sort of like the ambassador for all invertebrates. Things I'm going to talk about today, if we do these types of things, can help all of our invertebrates in the world, and it really then helps our environment, right? So pollinators, they're sort of the ambassadors for saving the planet, I like to think. So I want to show you this slide about the importance of pollinators. This is something that Whole Foods did. This is their produce section. They took a picture of it, and then they removed all the fruits and vegetables that required a pollinator. They had to remove 52% of the fruits and vegetables. So if we didn't have the pollinators, it would be hard, on our produce section as well. So it does really affect us having pollinators. So who are pollinators? What kind of animals pollinate? Bees, butterflies, bats, birds, wasps, flies, beetles. Yeah, you guys are good. Okay, so here's most of them. The only one we left out was me. Yeah. Anybody go around with a paintbrush and pollinate? Yes. Okay, so all of us gardeners, right? We sometimes pollinate too. So yeah, definitely the butterflies, the bees, the beetles, the flies. We're going to show some pictures. Some flies look an awful lot like bees, and us. So, but bees are really the most important. And one of the reasons the bees are so important is because they're really there for the pollen. And right, pollen is what's pollinating. So they're coming specifically to get that pollen and collect it to feed their young. So they're definitely the heavy hitters on the pollinators, whereas most other animals, I'm going to call everyone an animal, they are going to land on a flower, land on another flower, and they're going to pollinate just by doing that, not because they're actually in there collecting pollen for the most reason. But the bees are going to transport it to their nests, and they tend to forage close to their nests. So if you have bees in your yard, their nests are probably pretty close. Now, some bees can fly, like honeybees, they say can fly maybe up to miles, but most of our native bees are going to stay within a local proximity to their nest. And they have this thing they call flower constancy, which means they like to go to the same flower. It's sort of like learning how to do something and then you can do it better the next time. So if when they forage, they would say oh, I like these daisies. I'm just going to stay on these daisies and keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? Because I've kind of learned it, versus going to a lot of different flowers, every other flower. And so that's why they're the most important. But I do want to spend just a couple minutes talking about the difference between honeybees and native bees, because honeybees are great. I love honey, right? Honey's good. They're very important for some agricultural products, like almonds we can think of up front, but farmers take hives to and from the farms to pollinate and get better pollination. But I just want to be sure we're going to make a distinction here that honeybees are not native to the United States. They're European honeybee is their name. And although they're an agricultural product, they don't really help save our native bees. So sometimes there's some confusion and people think they want to put a hive in so that they can save the bees. And there's great reasons to have a hive, but it's probably not to save our native bees, right? There's some competition that can occur. So it's just to be aware, it would be like an analogy would be, I want to save the birds, so I'm going to raise chickens. Now, chickens are great and I love eggs, but that's not really going to save the songbirds. So just an analogy there. But not to come down too hard, because again, sometimes we want the products that they provide. So I mentioned that the bees are going to transport pollen, and they do this in several ways. But I love this picture. I borrowed these from the Audubon Society with their permission. I'm also a volunteer there. That they have a carrying capacity on their body to get a lot of pollen. And in this case, it's called a corbicula, and it's a big moist lump on their legs. Sometimes they carry it in what's called a scopa, like on this bee, which is more like a brush that's collecting dry pollen, and it will take it back, and that can be on their legs, but it can also be on their abdomen or their thorax. Different bees have different structures. But again, they're designed to take pollen and really keep it with them, right? So as they're going from flower to flower, they're really doing a good job, an efficient job of transmitting that pollen. So we're going to focus on insect pollinators. I won't talk about bats and birds, but we do another program about encouraging birds in your yard. So for insect pollinators, they typically are going to need nectar. And right, where do you find nectar? Flowers, right? Mm-hmm. So we do need flowers for the nectar, but they need nesting sites and nesting materials. So I want to talk a little bit about what they need for that. And they need that pollen that they're going to feed to their young. And that's true of the bees. But for caterpillars, they're going to want a host plant. And people are really familiar usually with the example of the monarch and milkweed, right? We know that monarchs need milkweed, but a lot of butterflies, they need a specific host plant. And those host plants are usually native plants. So we want to be able to provide for their whole life cycle of our pollinators, not just the nectar for the flying adults. And some of them like water source, like honeybees and bumblebees will go to water. I'm going to show you a couple of examples, but some of the other bees won't. So it's nice to have a little bit of a water source. And then freedom from pesticides. I know it's really hard. We're all gardeners and there's bugs on your plant. And we want to get those bugs off our plant. But we have to realize that if we're using pesticides, we're also killing the beneficials. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. What can we do to get rid of things we don't want, but still not harm the beneficials? So for the flowers, flowers do grow in sun and shade, but most winged insects like bees and butterflies, they like warmth to fly. In fact, they say that butterflies won't fly unless it's 55 degrees. I don't know if that's an exact number, but you have to realize they like a sunny, warm location to fly. It makes it easier for them. And you want to select a lot of different types of flowers. Cindy's going to talk a little bit about this, about different types of flowers, but just know different heights, different flower types, different shapes, and overlapping bloom times. We're very lucky here in Central California where the weather here is nice year round and things are blooming year round, right? But we tend to get things that bloom in the spring and summer. So to the extent that we can find things that bloom in the winter, and I'll mention some plants as we go along, and in the early spring, when some of these pollinators are coming out and they're looking for fuel and there's not a lot available. So think about what kind of overlapping, how can you have something blooming all the time in your garden? And then we also recommend using single flowers. And I mean flowers that only have like one row of petals versus some of the double types of flowers. They tend to be really tight and sometimes the bees can't get in there to get the pollen or the nectar. So they're beautiful and there's a reason to have them if you like them, but in terms of attracting the pollinators, they're not the best. And then we can extend the bloom time by deadheading. You guys are all familiar with deadheading, but I will tell you in the bird presentation, I tell people not to deadhead so that they get the seed pods. So maybe deadhead and lay the seed pods on the ground or something so the birds can still come and get them. So different goals, but you'll get more flowers obviously if you deadhead. And then we like to say to grow them in patches. And when I say patches, I mean like 3 to 4 feet area. So like one bush, like let's say a ceanothus, right? That might be 3 or 4 feet. There's a patch. It has all the flowers on it. And it goes back to our flower constancy, right? That bee's going to come and go, bing, 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 bing. I know the ceanothus plant. I know how to get nectar out of that. But let's say you're doing daisies, you know, you might want to have 3 or 4 plants so that you're getting a patch again and helping that pollinator. So that's what that one's talking about. And then we also need a place for them to nest. So many of the bees are going to nest in the ground, about 70%. And most of our native bees are solitary. And this is kind of important in the sense that they don't have a hive. So bumblebees have a social network. And of course, the honeybees, we all know, are in a hive and they have a social network. And some wasps do. But most of our native bees are solitary. So one female laying a bunch of eggs. And then in a very small, I'm going to show you an example. So the good thing about that is they tend not to sting. They're not aggressive because they're not guarding a big social nest. So just kind of a nice thing. There's a program called Leave the Leaves with the Xerces Society, and it's sort of a message. You can get this sign from them that's up here that to say, I like it because if your yard is messy, you could put this sign up there and tell your neighbors, I'm not lazy. I'm really trying to help the insects because a lot of them overwinter in leaves, leaf litter. So, I mean, if you have to, you know, sometimes there's an HOA and you've got to like follow rules, right? But if you have to rake up some leaves, maybe leaving them in flower beds or leaving them at the edge of the lawn so that there's a place for our invertebrates to overwinter. So here's some examples. This is a ground nesting bee, little guy in there. And this is what a tunnel might look like. It might have a lot of branches. And they drop a pollen ball in there and lay an egg on it. And then they wall it off. Drop a pollen ball, lay an egg, wall it off, boom, 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 boom. And they put the eggs in here, and then the female will die, and then they'll emerge in the spring. So that's a tunnel ground nesting, or ground nesting, sorry. And then a tunnel nesting bee over here, it will do a similar thing where it's going to put pollen in the tunnel, lay an egg, wall it off, pollen, and continue down the tunnel. You can create a tunnel like that by taking sticks, maybe, and they sell things like this, you might have seen, and you can drill holes in a block of wood, but you have to clean those out. So the other thing you can do, I'm just going to pass these around, this is fun. These are milkweed sticks, and you'll see that the centers are hollow. So when you're cutting things back, you can, like just leave the stems up, maybe 8, 12, different heights. And the bees will tunnel in there if you have the pithy stems. Other things besides milkweed, like roses and berries, but you're out gardening, you see that it makes a pithy center, then maybe consider leaving some of those so the bees will nest in there. It's kind of cool. So this just gives you some ideas if you have one that you've created, but certainly nature will provide for the bees a home if we, yes, go ahead. Sorry, both of you.
Why face the whole southeast?
Oh, that's just if you have that box, that's probably where it's going to warm up the most. So if you have a choice, I have mine facing east, and they did use it. So I think that's just the best to get that morning sun.
So the solitary bees, if you see bees together, we're looking at a honeybee or looking at a wasp.
No, because you might see more than one bee, like you might see mining bees or sweat bees, you might see more than one. But typically you're right, like if you see a bush of lavender and it's covered with honeybees or bumblebees, those are solitary bees. But it doesn't mean they won't necessarily be together, but you might see one going into a hole like that. Sometimes you just see the hole, right? You don't always see the bees going in. So they'll be
I was thinking of letting kids know that there's a whole bunch of bees, so that means that they're not stingers, you don't have to worry.
Oh, I got you.
If we know that most of our bees are.
Yeah, if you see a one-off bee, it might be a solitary bee. I can't always guarantee that 100% because I've probably seen a single bumblebee. We've seen single bumblebees. So, yeah. Okay. So then the caterpillars are going to need food. So they need the host plant. They're going to lay the eggs on or near that plant. And I have a funny story of milkweed in a pot that has chives in it too. And a monarch came by and missed. She laid an egg on my chives. So I'm not really sure what happened to that egg. I never saw it again. But they can make mistakes too. But it needs to only eat that one plant. This sometimes happens though, that people get a little upset that the caterpillar ate their plant. Now, if it's a tomato hornworm, we're upset, right? We pick that off and we get rid of it. But if we're trying to grow a plant, a host plant for the butterfly, and they eat our plant, I think that's okay. I'm just going to give you permission. That's success, right? Right, and it's fun to watch. Maybe, don't plant it in a place where, it's a showcase and you don't want to see just a bunch of sticks after the caterpillars eat your plant.
But what happens when they run out of food? Are they going to die? Like if you have too many of them on one?
They could. I mean, that's nature, right?
Yeah.
Usually a certain percentage of them will live. They'll crawl off and try to find other milk, in the case of milkweed or whatever plant it is. Sometimes females will do something, but monarchs will do something called egg dumping. And I don't know why, but they will just dump their eggs. And I witnessed it sitting outside my window last year. This monarch came by and I went out and counted them. There were 50 eggs on all the milkweed that was just right outside my window. And like almost none of them made it. I went out there and I labeled every plant, like this one has 7 eggs on it, and this one has 5. And the next day I came back and there's like 2 are gone, 4 are gone, 10 are gone. I'm like, oh my God, they're all gone. So I don't know what makes them do that, but if she lays too many eggs, obviously the plant can't support it. They say that normally, in the monarch case, that she will lay 1 egg on 1 plant. But I find it it's not your experience.
I had to run to homes 3 times to buy more milk.
You have to go buy more milkweed
in order to feed the caterpillars that we have, because they were eating like a plant a day.
Right. Sometimes it depends on what kind of milkweed you have too.
That's true.
So, yes.
From your other class, I learned, I live in Laurel Bay. And I learned milkweed plants that died were because I can't grow them. So are there plants here that you're showing that I can grow in one day?
Probably not for monarchs. I mean, it's not recommended to put milkweed within 5 miles of the overwintering site. Now that's the Xerces statement from their scientists, so we usually abide by that, but I'm sure there's milkweed within 5 miles of overwintering sites. But they think that that might be why, like in Southern California, they don't migrate anymore as much. There's a year-round population, same within Florida, certain areas where it doesn't normally freeze. So I think their thinking is they don't want to encourage them to stay. If the milkweed if they don't have to leave the overwintering site to find milkweed, they might not leave at all.
What's the downside of that?
Well, that's their natural pattern is to migrate. So what is the downside? I don't think we know yet, right? Could the population crash? Could that be part of the reason why the numbers are so low from historic? So I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions about that, but we try not to mess with nature, right? Yes, Dave.
On that topic, I don't know how feasible this is, but I happened to see a post on Nextdoor within the last week. And it was somebody who had that very same problem where their milkweeds were decimated and
Right.
their caterpillars were hungry. And so he basically said, does anybody else have any milkweed out there? And I don't know if he was offering to pluck them and take them off and put them to your house. I don't know if that's even a good idea.
Every year I do hear that. So sometimes, and it's not always, but sometimes it's non-native milkweed. Non-native milkweed has a red flower, and most of our native milkweeds, I'm going to show you a couple pictures, they have like white or pinkish flowers. The caterpillars tend to eat that. Well, they like to eat it, but the monarchs tend to lay more eggs on the non-native milkweed. So then you have all these caterpillars that can't be supported. So it's just an interesting phenomena. I'm not saying that it does sometimes happen with native milkweed as well, but it's nature, right? Sometimes they mess up and they laid too many eggs on that milkweed and it's not enough to support it. And then what do? Like, there's not normally a recommendation to like bring them inside or, feed them something else, or, it's like, we kind of we got to do what we can do, but maybe we don't have to interfere with what's going on and what nature chose to do. So in addition to milkweed, there's a lot of other plants though that serve as host. I have this book that I love, and it says Southern California on it, but it has mostly butterflies from all over, our area too. It's called An Introduction to Southern California Butterflies. And the nice thing is, and now everything's on the internet too, so you can probably look it up, but it'll tell you like what the host plant is of that butterfly. So if you want like a Gulf fritillary butterfly, then to plant a passion vine. So it's kind of fun to look and see what butterflies you might be able to track by looking at what their host plant is. And I just had an anise swallowtail on my citrus. Anise swallowtails like to host plant is citrus, and so it was very interesting to see for the first time that I saw that on my plant. So it doesn't have to be native. They're not all native plants necessarily. Some of the butterflies are non-native as well. So here's two examples of the milkweed, narrowleaf milkweed and woolly pod milkweed. Usually I put it up there because people always ask me. These are the two most common that are from our area, that are native to our area. The woolly pod is really hard to find. We're trying to propagate it at the Master Gardener propagation in our demonstration garden. So hopefully we'll have it in the future to sell. It emerges early, which is great because the butterflies leave our coast, the monarchs, in January, February timeframe. And this fascicularis in my yard doesn't come up till like, March, April sometimes. So depending on, could we have an earlier sprouting variety would be the Areocarpa. So look for that. Then in terms of the water, both the bees and the butterflies are not really swimming. They're just kind of touching their pads on the damp surface, and they're also getting nutrients, minerals, amino acids, and a little bit of moisture. I also volunteer down at the Pismo Beach Butterfly Grove, and they sometimes I'll see the monarchs. They'll just land on a wet fence post, a wooden fence post that's wet from the dew, and they're just kind of absorbing some stuff. Or they won't be in a puddle, but they'll be just on the wet dirt on the ground. So even just a small source. I have some examples. This is in our demonstration garden, the Seven Sisters Garden in Slow. It's gravel in a bird bath that just has a little bit of water in it. And then, this is one of our master gardener's fountain, in his front yard. You can hardly see, but there are honeybees all over, just on the wet cement part of the bird bath. So we've done all those things. We brought all those things to our yard. And now one thing we want to do though is avoid the pesticides. But the good news is if we're planting native plants, they don't have a lot of pests. So you need less pesticides with native plants. But if you do have pests and you do have things that you have to get rid of, try to use less toxic methods. We have this program called the Integrated Pest Management System. You might have heard of that. UCANR runs that, and there's the website for it. And it looks at trying to use the least toxic method first. So if I have aphids, I wash them off or squish them because that's kind of fun. And then, but I had a totally cool thing happen. On my citrus, little baby leaves were coming out just now, a couple weeks ago. And I went over there and looked at it, and there were aphids all over. You know, they love the nice succulent new leaves, right? And I thought, well, I should hose those off. And then I thought, well, I'll look a little closer. And when I looked really close, there was a predator on it. There was a lacewing, and they eat aphids. And I was so excited. So then I just left, and I came back a few days later, and I saw all the aphid mummies. And they're like just the little shells of the aphids. They had gone sucked all the juice out of those aphids. And now there's only like 2 or 3 left on there. So I'm like, oh, let nature take its course. And they took care of my aphids. So I was really thrilled. So anyways, there's things like that we can do that can help. And I put this ceanothus there, the picture of a ceanothus, because to remind me to tell you that ceanothus tends to attract parasitic wasps. Now, that sounds bad, right? But there are these little teeny wasps that are like a 1/4 inch that eat aphids. So you want to ceanothus, if for no other reason, then maybe it will attract parasitic wasps to your yard.
Those are the ones that fertilize the pigs.
I don't know for sure. I'm not sure about that.
There is a wasp that does fertilize things.
Yeah.
But not the one she's talking
Okay, good. Because I was going to say I wasn't familiar with that being the one, but thank you, Dennis. But you could also call the Master Gardener helpline. So if you have an issue and you're trying to figure this out, and maybe it's something, you guys are all experienced gardeners, so you might have, tried a few things. At the end, one of my last slides, I show you, and I have a handout here that also has our phone number on it if you need to call and ask for advice. But try to avoid using pesticides the best we can. Okay. So my next question is, why do we want to use native plants? Does anyone have native plants in their yard? Yeah, everyone has them. Okay, they're pretty.
Low water.
Low water.
Support native wildlife.
Support native wildlife. Good. Okay, so really native plants, native pollinators love native plants. They grew up together. I like to tell the story that I'm Czech and I grew up on sauerkraut. Half of you might go, "Boo, not eating that." Liver dumpling soup, woo, not eating that. So, but I grew up on that, so that's my thing, right? So same with our pollinators. They grew up with the ceanothus, with the manzanita. They co-evolved with that, and that's going to attract more of them. So think of native plants and native pollinators as going together. And then you, in addition to them co-evolving, they also will attract 3 to 4 times more pollinators, the native plants will, than the non-native plants. And I have a slide I'm going to share with you to give you some example of that. They're serving as the host plant, so you want them in there to be the host plant for your pollinators. And again, caterpillars are driving biodiversity, and native plants are usually less invasive, right? Now, that's not always true if you have milkweed. That does grow by rhizomes, and sometimes you may think it might be invasive. So there could be some examples where that's not 100% true, but they tend not to be invasive. And also they're going to save water. Someone mentioned saving water, but we have to think that California is a big place, right? We go from the wetlands to the desert. So if I take a sycamore tree and plant it in the desert, and the sycamore tree likes to grow in riverbeds and needs a lot of water, probably not going to be successful unless I really give it a lot of water. So we do have to, the irrigation is minimal if it matches kind of what the rainfall for that area is. And that's why we're going to try to find plants that are good for your area that matches the rainfall that we have here. So it will save time and money because there's pretty much, we don't fertilize the plants. I mean, some people do, but I have never fertilized any of my native plants, and they do really well. Very little pesticides, as we mentioned before, and very little pruning. For the most part, they don't need to be pruned, but of course you might want to prune them if they're in, they're overgrowing a certain area. And then we need to talk about what time of the year to prune them, but very little pruning, not like, if you get a certain fruit tree and you have to prune it at certain times. And of course, we'll reduce the chemical use, which is great for our native insects, but also helps with our water supply and not getting those chemicals into the watershed and our creeks. So there's that. And then my new best friend, Doug Tallamy. How many people know Doug Tallamy? Yes, right. Okay. He has written a series of books. He's an entomologist, but he's written a series of books called like Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. And really what he says is to really get these insects to thrive, we need native plants, kind of for some of the reasons I've already explained, but they really do promote wildlife. And another reason is that he's asking us is because we as landowners, most of the land in the United States is owned privately, whether it's by farmers, ranchers, homeowners. And so it's really up to us. Everyone can, do their part and plant 1 or 2 native plants. So even a few plants can make a difference. So if you're, and he's a very good writer, so they're very easy reads.
And I was just gonna say that bird, you see how it has a caterpillar?
Uh-huh.
And that's what birds use to feed their young. They can't feed it nectar or seeds.
Right, they feed insects. Yeah.
Yeah.
96% of birds will do that. He also has just come out with a book for children. I don't know the exact age group, but if you're interested in getting this message out to the younger set, check it out because it's a similar story, but for the younger audience. So this is not meant to, not on the eye chart, not meant for you to read it, but this is a group in San Francisco that took Doug's work and looked at plants, native and non-native plants, and their reproductive value to butterflies and moths. Basically, how many butterflies and moths are going to lay an egg on this plant? So all the green ones, you probably know where I'm going with this, are native plants. All the red ones are cultivars, non-native plants. So much more use of these plants to lay eggs, and that's really important for the biodiversity. So because you can't read what's down below, I just blew it up to the next slide just so you could see the plants. Now this is San Francisco, so not all of these might be perfect for us, but many of them are. And you'll see these names pop up again. Certain plants that are good, oaks and ceanothus and rhymes and sages, and so the same names keep popping up. So this is probably a good starting list. And those of you who are going to the garden or the nursery tomorrow, maybe we'll look for some of these to see what they have. But there's other group that's doing, and this is along with Doug Tallamy's group and with the Audubon Society. They have this website called bringingbackthenatives.net. And what they did was they looked at, and I'll pass a few of these around, these laminated, I want them back, but I just picked out ones that I thought would grow well near us. And they have not only a little bit about the species, but then he lists like how many species of butterfly and moth can lay an egg on this plant. So it doesn't mean you will have this many on your plant, but like just looking at the first one, the big leaf maple, 87 different species that could potentially lay eggs on this plant. So I'll pass them around, you can take a quick look through. It's really looking at what are the most productive plants for insects. And the website has 39 plants on it. And then it also includes the number of Lepidoptera, which is butterflies and insects collectively together. And then, because again, he's saying we need the caterpillars to really drive biodiversity. So you can take a look through there and see if any of them look like something you might want to plant in your yard. So when we're thinking about getting the plants, we want to buy them locally if we can. So that's why we're going to Las Politas, but there's other places where you can get native plants. I know in SLO they have growing grounds, and it's a not-for-profit organization that does a lot of native plants as well. Some of the local nurseries and hardware. One of the handouts that you're going to get on your email list is we did a plant resources list with listing many of the nurseries, farm supply, Slow Botanical Garden. There's a lot of places that are offering native plants, and that will give you a start to start looking. But check your zone. So even between someone who's living at the beach and someone who's living here at the church, right? It's going to be a little bit different. And then even inland farther. So we kind of have to know our zone and what's going to grow well there. We want to put the right plant in the right place. Back to the example of, we don't want to put a sycamore, in the desert type of thing. So we want to use plants that are going to do well here. And so for that, I use two websites, calscape.org and bloomcalifornia.org. So I'm going to show you some slides for both of those. So what I did for Calscape, it's super fun. I love this website. You can play for hours on it. If you want to go to advanced search, you're going to put in the town. I put in Los Osos. And since we're talking about pollinators today, I put in bee gardens, butterfly gardens. And then I checked off commonly available, because nothing's worse than finding the perfect plant for your yard and then find out like no one carries it and you can't find it, right? So that's helpful. So the first thing that popped up is a ceanothus. This is just the first page. There were 115 plants: blue-eyed grass, flannel bush, hummingbird sage, coastline oak, California fuchsia, another ceanothus, a toyon. So the cool thing about this is you can actually put your exact address in there and it'll tell you your climate zone. So helps you really narrow down the options. Now you could check off too many things and then get nothing. So go back, like don't say like I want a red in the shade on sand on blah, 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 too many things that'll, freak it out. But you could just put the type. Let's say you have a spot for a tree and you want a tree that's going to attract butterflies and it gets to be in the sun and it's in Los Osos. And then it will give you a list of what kinds of trees might be appropriate for your area. You can put in your type of soil, you can put in whether it's sunny, what the drainage is like, what the water needs are. I didn't even select that, but usually I put low or very low for water need if we're concerned about using too much water. I also love to check ease of use, easy to grow. Says again, back to I'm kind of a lazy gardener. I don't really want to spend a lot of time. I don't want any fussy plants. So I select ease of care. Easy to care for. And you can also select the height if that's important too. So lots of different things that you can select and narrow down your options. Yes.
Is that calscape.com?
.org. Org, yeah. Thank you for asking that. And I should mention that it's through the California Native Plant Society. And Cindy's going to be talking about that too. So, and Cindy are both members of California Native Plants. Yes, Dennis.
Native Plant Society are local group. Has a Native Plant Society sale once a year. And Cindy knows when it is.
It's the first Saturday in November.
So we just missed it.
Yeah, we are starting to have an April sale too, and the organizers say they will do that in April 2024. It's a smaller sale and you pre-order everything on the website, but every year, the first Saturday in November, we have a big native plant sale.
And lots of seeds available too.
Yeah,
so if
seeds
you
are really popular.
yeah, a lot of seeds and very good price, was just $1 for a pack of seeds. So
yeah.
And the people running it are very knowledgeable,
super.
like Cindy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And well, a whole host of folks there too, that you go there and they'll help you pick out the plants. Thank you, Dennis. That's really important to remember that, but it'll be next year. But this year we can still go and get them somewhere else. So here's an example of what Calscape shows you. This is what they call their plant sign. And I think this is so cool. Like you could print this out, you could laminate it, put it on your, you could like have your whole botanical garden in your yard with these signs. So it tells you like it's a shrub, how tall it grows, what kind of flowers, when does it flower. So this is the ceanothus. It's flowering in winter and spring. So perfect, right? We need something that's going to flower at those off times. This would be a good choice. And then it shows what kind of wildlife. It's got a bird, a butterfly, a bee, and caterpillar. So it's supporting a lot of wildlife as well. Low moisture, so it gives you some idea. When you open, let's see, I'll pass around. I don't know if I have that one. No, this one isn't that specific ceanothus, but it's a different ceanothus, and it's 2 pages. It'll show you like what kind of information you get. I mean, it's very thorough.
So somehow on the website, you can get a plant sign like that?
Yes.
Oh.
You go on the bottom, and on the bottom it says, I'm gonna read it so I make sure I tell you the right thing. Well, of course I can't find it now. It says plant sign. It actually says plant sign, and you click on plant sign, and this will pop up, and you can either print it out or save it as a PDF. And then the QR code up there will take you. So like if you had a garden, like you have a community garden and you wanted to put up signs by them, someone could QR code that and get to that page like I sent around with the whole, all the information.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's good. It's cool. So it's fun. So the other website, it's not as extensive, but Bloom California is a program. It's bloomcalifornia.org. And they tried to put together 11 plants that were easy to grow, that were suited for a wide variety of ecosystems, so that almost everybody could plant these plants. So they attract wildlife. So on here, you probably can't read it from back there, but like native mints, oaks, ornamental grasses, Phacelia, Clarkia, currants, iris, manzanitas, yarrow, toyon, and sage. And when you go on the website, you can click on that and it'll give you more suggestions, but then you can cross-reference that with Calscape to see if it grows in your area specifically. But they also have design ideas on there too. So you could look at planting ideas.
Can you tell me what that website is again?
It's, yeah, I thought I wrote it on here, but,
Bloomca.org.
yeah, bloomcalifornia.org. Yeah. It doesn't have they put that apostrophe in their advertising, but it doesn't have the exclamation point doesn't have that in the website.
Okay.
So bloomcalifornia.org and Calscape. So two fun places to go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about actually planting the plants, because sometimes this is where some confusion comes in. We get this beautiful plant at the nursery, we bring it home, we put it in, and it doesn't do well. So there's a couple of tips that might be helpful. First thing is we want to plant now. We want to plant in the fall and the winter for native plants. And mostly that's because that's when their growth period is. They're going to be expanding their roots during that time. And so that's when you want to put them in. Now, Cindy just said there's probably going to be a plant sale in April, and you might want to buy a native plant in April and put it in. Now you can still, nurture it along and it'll probably make it. But I would caution you about ceanothus, oaks, toyons, and manzanitas. They are typically do not thrive if they're planted in the spring and the summer. So even if you find them for sale, I would avoid that. They might live. There was this thing called the pandemic in 2020. I don't know, maybe you heard about it. And we had all these plants at the Master Gardeners that we had ready for a plant sale, and that they were nurturing, and they were gonna, but we didn't want people even in the garden taking care of them. So a lot of them were native plants, and they knew that I was like the native plant nerd. And so they said, Peggy, do you want some of these plants? And so I took home a bunch of these things like manzanitas, ceanothus, and I got like half of them died. I planted them in the summer, in the heat of the summer. And even though I kind of knew what I was doing, a lot of them just won't thrive. So you could make it work, but your chances are better if you're going to plant it now in the fall and the winter. And the rule of thumb is usually after the first rain. Well, that's great on yours. We have rain. So yay this year, yay last year. But if it doesn't rain, we still kind of follow like October, November, and then you're just going to have to pretend that you are Mother Nature and give it rain in the winter. But what we do is we want to plant the whole wider, but not deeper. So if the plant sinks into the ground, it's more likely to get root rot and get too much moisture. So we want the plant up in the hole. But what happens if we dig the hole too deep, right? Even unless you're really, really good about tamping it down and getting it solid base, which I have to do because I have to put in gopher. Does anyone have gophers? Yeah. Oh, no one. I see. So I'm the only one. So I see someone has a gopher cage here, and they're probably going to talk about that.
Oh,
but,
yeah, I forgot to talk about that.
But if you have a gopher cage and then you have a plant, and let's say your plant is only this big, right? Because it's in a 1 gallon. Now I want to plant this 1 inch above, but I got all that dirt. So what I do is I put the native dirt back in there, and then I take a 2x4 and I bam, bam, pound it, pound it, pound it, until it's rock hard, that only my plant, when I plant my plant, will be like there, and the base of the dirt will be here, right? So just make sure, because that's happened to me, sometimes I think I did a good job, and you go back a week later and it's gone a little bit down. So then put an irrigation basin around it, you know, you might have to lift it back up.
By the way, advertising moment, Garden Club is selling those gopher baskets. If you just go to our website, lovgardenclub.org,
Nice.
you can click on that and support our club.
Beautiful,
Thank
because it looks like a lot of people have
Yeah.
gophers.
And the reason you don't, it's wider and not deeper is because of root rot.
You want the roots to spread out. So sometimes if you're digging your hole, you first come into your ground, and your ground might be kind of hard, right? So if you just dig the hole exactly the size of the pot, it doesn't have like easy way for the roots to kind of expand. So if you do like 30% more, then it can start moving out.
Don't we want our roots to go down? Because
They will too, but
go out first.
But they can go out then too, yeah, yeah. Just helps it out a little bit, but we don't want it to sink, so we don't want to like do too much below it. And then another principle is to keep the mulch away, and you probably know this too, because it's true of a lot of other plants, not just natives. But if we put the mulch right up close to the plant, holds in too much moisture right on that root ball, and we can get Phytophthora or other funguses growing there. So just keep the mulch, if you're going to do mulch, maybe 6-8 inches away from the plant. So now, usually the biggest, you're going to get a handout about on the email about native plant cultural practices, and this is spelled out in there. But one of the biggest questions we get is how to water them, and people feel like they're either watering them too much, they're not watering them enough, or they heard they don't need any water, so then they don't water them at all. It's like, oh. So again, we have to know the needs of that plant, right? The sycamore is going to be different than, you know, the ceanothus. So knowing that first. But what I usually do is I check with a moisture meter. So I'm going to plant my plant and I'm going to water it. Then I'm going to go out, like maybe in my yard, I have a lot of sandy soil. You guys too. I go out like 2 or 3, 4 days later, put this in the root ball and see if there's more. You can just stick your finger in too if you want. Reach down in there or put a screwdriver in and see if it comes out with wet. But this is like $5 or $10 at the hardware store, and you probably already have one, right? So you want to wait till it gets a little bit dried out, like down to like maybe 1 or 2. You don't want it to get completely dry, but you don't want to give it more water if it's already moist. So it'll be a little bit of a game the first week or 2 to see how fast does your soil drain. And then once you get down to like a 1 or 2, you water it again. And that's probably going to be every 3 to 4 days when you first plant it. And then you'll slowly back off and go to watering it once a week. That's kind of for your first month, and then your second month. And you want to keep an eye on it for the first 2 years. Usually once 2 years has passed, they're pretty much good with native water, assuming we get rain, right? If we don't get rain, you might want to supplement it in the winter, but we don't want to water them very much in the summer and in the spring. And a lot of native plants will wilt if they have too much water. So our tendency is we see a wilting plant and we want to give it more water. So always check first with your moisture meter to see if it really does need water. And so we'll water it regularly in the winter and spring because that's when it wants the water, and then deeply and infrequently in the fall and summer. Some people recommend using overhead sprinklers. I don't know where the 6 hours came from, but that seems like a long time. But one philosophy is that if it mimics rain, it's a good idea. So you could see it could rain for all day. But I have a lot of my native plants on drip, and I don't have a problem with that. They seem to be doing okay.
I don't know nobody uses water bags, or I don't see water bags.
Oh yeah, I have used it on a few. You know what happens? Like the ground squirrels eat holes in them in my yard. I don't know what other people have. Has anyone used water bags? Anyone else?
I mean, I just find it. I mean,
Yeah.
From North Carolina where we use water bags everywhere.
Oh,
And
interesting.
here we have such a problem with water. It's like, why wouldn't I use that
Yeah.
for concentrated water? What is
What is that?
It's like an inner tube you fill with water, you put around your plant and it has very small perforations in it that slowly irrigate. Is that right? Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
and you have the donuts that
Yeah.
have like typically two nipples that you do, and then you'll see, and I've started seeing them more in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
You'll see the little triangles around the base of trees,
Mhm.
and they hold between 10 and 20 gallons of water, and it just drips.
Yeah, slowly drips and slowly. Yeah, I don't know that I did have two and they failed because someone ate holes in them. So I'm not sure if that's why.
Probably remember
So, but it's something to try and you
Yeah.
might not, yeah, you might have a good outcome there. But yeah, slow watering is good. Now here's my friend the lacewing that I saw eating my aphids. So I just want to show you what a few other pollinators look like.
Beautiful.
So they're really small. This is a beautiful picture because it's yeah, it looks like they're huge. This is the syrphid fly, looks a lot like a bee. It does pollinate, but again, by happenstance because it's just moving around getting nectar. And this is what the larvae look like. So you might see those green worms type of thing, caterpillars on and yes. And tachnid flies. They seem very hairy too, right? So they will pick up some pollen as they're going along. And then here's the small, there's my buddy, the predatory wasp that everyone thinks, not all wasps are bad. Some wasps are nasty, right? And this one has a mean sting. This is a tarantula hawk that likes milkweed flowers, but they usually leave you alone. And if you notice that only the females can sting, so don't get too close to find out. Just assume they're all females, but they might not sting you. And then think about other flowers that aren't so showy. This variegated euonymus and this coffee berry, you can almost not see the flowers. You're like, what is it really in flower? You walk by and it's buzzing like crazy. So it's covered with bees. So think about things that maybe you might not normally think of as a good pollinator plant. And then also trees. We saw the example with some of the keystone plants, but trees attract a lot of pollinators. Maybe the Palo Verde I have a picture of here isn't the best for your area because it really does like hot, dry weather, but we have oaks, we have willows, elderberry, mountain mahogany, some other trees that might do well. And then don't get discouraged because this is kind of the classic about native plants is the first year they sleep. You keep looking at it going, when is it going to grow? And the next year it creeps, maybe it's a teeny bit bigger. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, look at that. So they do take a little bit of time to get going. And a friend of mine got me this towel. I'm not really sure what that means. But what I try to do is when an alien dies in my yard, I replace it. So, we had to have our yard landscape too. It has a lot of non-native plants in it. And when things die, I put a native plant in. And there's no, don't feel bad about having non-native plants. I mean, we all love plants for different reasons, right? And it's nice to have beautiful things that you love. But if we can put a few natives in to help augment that, that would be great. Could you reduce or eliminate a lawn? And start small. Don't feel like you have to, rip out your whole garden and put all native plants in, or I'm going to come by and inspect. So I'll just encourage you to plant a native plant today. And hopefully you're coming to the nursery with us. And I just made a summary of most of the key things that I said, just to remind you: diverse flower types, overlapping blooms, native plants, single flowers. Don't forget about trees, deadheading, leaving the bare ground, growing flowers in patches, and avoiding pesticides. Those are the key points. And here's our Master Gardener Helpline information. If you can call one of our offices or come in. We're also open to bringing samples. If you've got a leaf of something that's you want to share, or you got a bug, we'll try to help you find out, what it is. And you can email us as well. Do I have the email? I have the email on these cards. So if someone wants the email, they can email those. And then some resources from what we talked about. So I'll just leave this one up in case anyone wants to write down phone number, and I hope that was some helpful information and that you enjoyed it.